I'm Stephen Rains, co-creator of tonight's event, and I want to preface this talk by saying that my presentation tonight, I'm going to say things that are sexually graphic, possibly offensive, and definitely indelicate. So if anyone has, all right, you're applauding. But I want to give people, seriously, I want to give you a moment that to cover your ears or leave the room. All right. And this is a moment where I also want to say that I'm an Antioch grad, so I'm sure they're going to be really proud of this presentation. And it's also going to be a slideshow of my life. And when trying to examine Anaïs's allure for me was a tough question. At first it seemed innate, like one might like vanilla or chocolate, and I realized that I don't have one specific answer to Anaïs's allure, but I do have many stories to help shape an answer. And this story starts off that when I was 16, I met my friend Stephanie Recht, and this is a photo of that time, and she handed me a paperback book. And she said, "Put this in your bag. It's the best smut you'll ever read." And the book was Anais Nin's Delta Venus. The brown cover, vintage image of a woman sitting on a chair, her garter belts exposed, pulling up her thigh highs. At that age, I was so horny and sexually charged. And Stephanie was right. I probably jacked off at least 3 times before page 12. This was before the internet and easy to access porn. It was 1991 or 92, and these stories were the most exciting thing I had read. It was nothing like the last book Stephanie had loaned me, Machiavelli's The Prince. But oh, those stories about boarding school boys and exhibitionists on trains. Maybe it was when I exhausted of reading the collection or when taking a break after coming that I know Antioch is proud, right? That I finally read the preface. It was then that I fell in love. It told the story of this woman with this unpronounceable name writing erotica for $1 a page, and how she heard feedback from this anonymous collector to change how she wrote. He wanted her to leave out the poetry. I kept rereading that preface and discovered it was taken from her published diary. I had started a diary a year or 2 earlier at the urging of a communication teacher, Phyllis Thorpe. Writing in my journal was my way of staying sane throughout my life. And I was interested in reading this sexually adventurous woman's diary. So, not thinking it through, I went to my high school library at Parkway South in St. Louis, Missouri, and I looked for books by Anais Nin. And there was nothing there. But through the Parkway school system, they did have Diary 5 as part of their collection, and I ordered it via interlibrary loan. So my reading of Anaïs's diary started with volume 5, where it had this exotic bird-like woman on the cover. But on the inside, it was the first time I saw images of Anais. She was beautiful, this bohemian bombshell. And at an age and era where gay men were idolizing and revering women like Madonna, or Broadway stars like Bernadette Peters, or like my friend Christopher Honey, who worships supermodels, Naomi and Christy, Anais Nin was my diva. Around this time, I went to my first gay bar, got a fake ID, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Started going to underground raves and abandoned warehouses. And in Diary 5 were photos of Anais going to a party at Kenneth Anger's house. They were dressed like we did at raves. Yet, Anais Nin's party happened decades before. The creative community and partiers of Nin's circle reminded me of those in my own. Anais wore pasties and a birdcage on her head, while I wore vinyl orange pants and platform shoes. I was made fun of in high school and not popular. It was the Midwest, and talent in sports made you who you were, not intellect. I didn't fit in, and that is putting it mildly. I was brandished a fag, and there weren't other out gay people in my high school when I was a freshman. Yet, when I went to gay bars, I was popular, and I found people with similar stories and similar interests. At school, I struggled to have a social circle, but at the gay bar, I had an endless collection of phone numbers and people wanting to hang out and have my attention. A teacher in school, Bruce Schneider, saw me reading Diary 5 and told me about the film Henry and June. I tracked down the book. Henry and June is an unexpurgated diary that was published after Nin's death and the death of her first husband, detailing her sexual relationship with Henry Miller and June Miller. It was dramatic and detailed Anaïs's double life. In her passages, I did not find Henry Miller charming at all, but I found great resonance in Anaïs's double life to my own. There's a passage in Henry and June. I have only 3 desires now: to eat, to sleep, to fuck. What a great thing to read at 17. Because that's all I was interested in too at that time. And I was living this double life, balancing 2 worlds like she had been. Between her, I just turned it off. She was balancing 2 worlds, between her banker, being a banker's wife and having a passionate life with Henry Miller, and then me with being this eccentrically dorky kid during the day and then going to clubs and being immensely popular. I started going to used bookstores downtown and buying all of Anais Nin's books I could find. I devoured her writings. In her unexpurgated diaries, she scrutinized sexual encounters. I had been doing the same thing. I kept doing it, using her as a model, wanting to get to the bottom of sex, wanting to demystify it, but also to capture it and keep reliving it. I was always told I was too sensitive, and here on the page, I was meeting this woman who seemed nothing but sensitive. She honored it, wore it like a badge and expressed it, wanted a world of beauty and love and art. In her collection of essays in favor of the sensitive man, she states, "Please do not mistake sensitivity for weakness." Anaïs's life became a model for me. At age 19, when needing to move, I investigated living on a houseboat after reading Nin's long romantic passages about it. So when my lease was up, I looked to fulfill life on a houseboat. But living on the Seine is different than a houseboat docked in marinas in Naples, Florida. So I never did that. Anais Nin inspired me to reside in one of my favorite residencies to date. At the age of 23, I was a bit new age and I was looking for signs. I met Wayne Stodgill waiting in line at the Tampa International Gay and Lesbian Film Festival. Wayne is pictured in the hat with his long-term partner, Tom Lockridge. He said he lived in Sulphur Springs. I told him how I recently read that Jack Kerouac lived in Sulphur Springs. And Wayne smiled, tilted his head, and said, "I live in that house." We immediately hit it off, and he told me that there was an apartment for rent in Kerouac's building. I toured the apartment, nicknamed the Hobbit Hole, and when walking out, Wayne casually gestured toward the side of the walkway and said that there was a fountain buried underneath. I was sold. Primarily because, as readers of Nin's diary will know, that in the first published diary, she talked about unearthing a fountain in front of her house and how it changed the atmosphere. After unpacking, I grabbed a shovel and unearthed the buried fountain in my new apartment. I lived at this place for 8 years and will always look back at some of those years as the happiest of my life. I was living there when I gathered my writings and created a simple, saddle-stapled book. I made enough copies for friends, and I wouldn't have ever thought about doing this had I not read Nin's passages about the hours she spent at her own printing press when no one else would publish her. Nin's words in Diary 1 guided me as she gives advice to a friend. Create a world, your world, alone, stand alone, and then love will come to you. Then it comes to you. It was only when I wrote my first book that a world I wanted to live. Whoa, I'm not doing that justice. Let me do it again. All right. It was only when I wrote my first book that the world I wanted to live in opened to me. That small book on copy paper was later reworked and reprinted into my first published collection. A world did open to me. Having that book published changed the course of my life. Anais became a mother figure to me, guiding me along and offering me comfort. As a gay male and artist, I knew that I wasn't going to live the life that my parents were living. Yet, I didn't know how I was going to make it happen. And Anaïs's account of her own life helped me make decisions for my own. When traveling, I visited Nin's past residencies. From Paris, to New York, to San Francisco, to even later her home in Silver Lake and having tea with her widower, Rupert Pohl. At one time, I even had an Anais Nin henna tattoo. I also have an Anais Nin t-shirt. 2 of them. I'm not a fanboy anymore of Anais. The allure became academic and an obsession became scholarship. Yet there are moments when I'm feeling doubtful and I think about what would she have done? About 15 or 20 years ago, there was this WWJD movement where people would wear bracelets with this acronym on it. And it was to serve as a reminder to them of what would Jesus do. So when there was a moment in their life that they questioned, they would think, oh, well, what would Jesus do? And they would act upon that. And of course, for me, I really wanted a WWAD shirt of what would Anais do? And so, a few years ago, I was purchasing a car, and I was very nervous about the decision. And when driving home from the dealership, not having purchased the car yet, I pulled over to the side of the road, and I wrote this poem that was published in a collection called My Diva, and it's gay men writing about their relationships with women, they have their own divas. And that ranges from, people writing about Madonna to Princess Leia. But mine, of course, was writing about Anais Nin, and it's called Anais Nin Never Bought a Car. And so, in a moment like this, as I shake hands with a salesman, haggle on price, I don't know what to do. I've modeled my life on her words, her account of what happened, how she handled herself. Would she have smiled at the salesman, used her rolling R accent to charm, spoke in her light voice to maneuver a deal? Anais probably wouldn't have needed a dealership at all. There was the mechanic shop in New York. She passed with a friend and casually said, I have sex with the men who work there. Those men, out of kindness, admiration, perhaps love, or maybe as a reward for her skill, would have given her a deal on an automobile. Her own car when she traveled with a handsome actor 20 years her junior from New York to California in his Model A Ford. Still married, neither man knowing about the other. She married that actor, having not divorced her husband. Anais could lie, but also detect one. She wouldn't need Carfax. Growing up a Midwesterner, I assess vehicles for practicality. She, born in the sensual city of Paris, would delight in the details, the luxury, never focusing on the miles per gallon. When collecting letters from Henry Miller to be published in a book, thoroughfare would be omitted. She had a young friend drive her to Henry's house, and he, already in his 60s, bounded down the stairs, excited to... Even with my checkbook open, I couldn't elicit such a response from a car salesman. I would need a bank loan. Anaïs's first husband was a banker. She wouldn't need a loan officer either. After her death, there was no car to bequeath, no children to divide belongings, but there were Anaïs's words, the daily diary writing where she road mapped her life for me to travel. Thank you.